Do you see the release of the 6,000 or so refugees from Albania as a token to the people by the Albanian government?
Well, you may have heard that I went to Albania about 3 weeks ago. In fact, I brought a sitting U.S. Congressman with me, Congressman Tom Lantos, who is the chairman, the co-chairman of the Congressional Human Rights Foundation. We went from Kosovo to Albania to visit with President Alia in Tirana. It's the first time in 51 years that anyone had been allowed to cross the border right near Prizren. What's happening today, I think, is a sign that the winds of change have now reached Albania. It's no secret what has happened in Romania, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland. It seems to me that when those kind of momentous events happen, people in every country will get the message. But let me say this, having spent 2 hours speaking to the president of Albania, Ramiz Alia, we got the distinct impression, Congressman Lantos and I, that he is a sincere reformer. And he had already put into progress changes that were really massive changes because of their own repressive system to date, including changes that would allow them to qualify for membership in the Helsinki conference. Now, I guess people are not patient and they want to be free now. And I guess what they're demonstrating about is the fact that while they were promised passports, the bureaucracy within Albania was not delivering those passports fast enough. And I guess what has started is a grassroots movement from the inside to force the issue of change within the country of Albania. But I was told by the president himself that they mean to become a member of the European community, that they wanted diplomatic relations with the United States and England and other Western European countries, and that they would make the changes necessary to become members of the Helsinki process. But it's complicated. He said that they had 35 protocols that had to be signed to become a full member, but they were in the process of doing that.
So when do you think it's likely that they might actually implement these changes?
Well, I think whatever their time schedule was before, you can be sure it's now speeded up, because the people are speaking and they want, I guess, a democratic form of government in Albania as exists in almost every other European country.
So there is every likelihood of the Albanian government opening its doors, so to speak, as the people in Eastern Europe have?
Well, as I understand it, they are making the passports now available to anyone that wants to leave the country. And frankly, I think that's a wise choice by Mr. Alia. But I also feel that he should speed up any of the reforms he had in mind. I took confidence from the fact, or I noted with some pleasure that he did remove hardliners from the government already. Several ministers, high-level ministers, have been removed, and that there probably will be more. And my advice to Mr. Alia is that the faster he gets on with the reform process, the better it will be for the people of Albania, because we don't want to see another situation like what happened in Romania, where the people have to push so hard that it becomes a violent situation. I hope that does not happen.
Do you think that it might become violent? Is there every possibility of that?
Well, let's put it this way. If you compare the two, and people do compare usually Albania with Romania, you can see that Mr. Alia is already handling the situation better than Mr. Ceausescu did, because if you recall, Mr. Ceausescu's response to Bishop Tokes, the Hungarian Bishop of Timisoara that started that, was to become even more brutal and repressive. As a matter of fact, as I recall, members of Securitate were firing on their own people. Now, you know, when you do that to a nation of people, then I guess their patience dries up, as it should have been, and what happened in Romania was the correct thing from the people's point of view. What I see in Albania right now is a much better response, where the first thing that Mr. Alia did was fire the Minister of the Interior, who had responsibility for the security forces, because one, I understand, and we don't know all the facts, by the way, but one, I understand, fired on somebody who was climbing the wall. So you could see a difference already, and I believe that those differences between Albania and Romania will grow, and that based on my 2-hour meeting with President Alia, I sensed a sincere reformer. You know, we can talk about what they did 50 years after the war. He has his own reasons for why that government was the way it was. But he ended our conversation with a a comment that went something like this, that we had our 50 years where we tried to be self-sufficient and rebuild our economy. You may criticize us for what we did, and I think we have to criticize them because obviously any place where there's massive deprivations of human rights, there should be criticism. But for some reason, he justifies the things that they had to do to survive as a nation. But now he says that they cannot avoid the changes going around them in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe, mainly in Eastern Europe, and with the average age, and this is incredible, it's got the highest birth rate in Europe, probably about the same as the Kosovo region in Yugoslavia. The average age of the population is under 26. Now, when I was there, I was watching Italian television. I do know that information gets in. So what he's saying is that Albania now has to respond to the changes, and that this is the challenge that Albania faces, and I believe what you're witnessing is kind of an acceleration of the reforms that have to be made to keep the people within Albania happy.
So you feel that the incidents such as the people who wanted to leave being fired upon, that will not occur again?
I don't believe so. If it does, it will be the worst thing that Mr. Alia can do, and it will only make the matter worse as it did in Romania. I think history speaks for itself.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate this. This is my first trip to Australia, and it's been very pleasant so far. Appreciate the hospitality of the Albanian community here and all the other people that I've met with so far, and I expect to be here about a week. I'm with my daughter Cara and her good friend Catherine, and we expect to find out a lot about Australia. I'm here in my capacity as a former congressman, as a current member of the board of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, and as the founder and president of the Albanian American Civic League. I served 4 years in the U.S. Congress. I was not your typical politician. No one ever thought I would run for Congress. I spent 22 years of my life as a professional, certified public accountant, I guess you call them chartered accountants here, with the international accounting firm Arthur Andersen. But I decided to get involved in public life at 43, requested early retirement. They gave it to me, and my life has not been the same ever since. It's been wonderful. But in any case, I am here to talk about one of the most egregious situations for human rights violations in the world today. Apartheid is alive and well. It's not in South Africa. Well, let me put it this way. South Africa has at least begun reacting to the reforms necessary to get rid of apartheid, and we know that Nelson Mandela has been released. But apartheid is alive and well in a province in Yugoslavia called Kosovo, where 93% of the population of 2 million people is Albanian, ethnic Albanian, and only 7% are Serbs. Now, within the province or the Republic of Serbia, this group of Albanians is a minority. Within that province of Kosovo, they are clearly the majority. And up until 1989, this province enjoyed the status of an autonomous province within Yugoslavia, much like the other republics, Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia. But the Serbs decided to go against the wise views of President Tito when it came to quelling ethnic tensions in this diverse melting pot called Yugoslavia. And they decided to take away their autonomy and brought back the ancient feelings of rivalry that existed between two groups, the Serbs and the Albanians. The current head of the party in Belgrade, Slobodan Milosevic, and the current president of the collective presidency of Yugoslavia are both Serbs and are both hard-line, one-party, one-man rule communists. The issue today in the province and in Serbia, as a matter of fact, the issue in Yugoslavia, because look what's happening with Slovenia and Croatia that just had multi-party elections, and they opted for democracy. The issue is that the Serbs want to keep their hardline, non-pluralistic political view, and this is what's creating the tensions in Kosovo, because the Albanians would like to see a democratic system. Their leader, Dr. Ibrahim Rugova, I refer to him as the Havel of Yugoslavia, or at least the Havel of Kosovo, because he's a writer. He has signed up 700,000 people of the 2 million people to an alternative party called the Democratic Alliance. The Serbs will not allow him to legalize that party because they say under their communistic system you can't have more than one party, the Communist Party. So this is creating added tensions. But the issue today, and don't let anybody fool you, is not an issue that is anything more difficult to comprehend than the fact that you have Albanians that want pluralism and the Serbian authorities. I'm not saying the Serbian people, because you may have noticed in the papers 2 weeks ago, 40,000 Serbs got on the streets of Belgrade saying to Mr. Milosevic they would like to see reforms and they want to get away from communism. So it's the Serbian authorities, much like the nomenclatura in Russia that finally now is giving in because of the power of Mr. Gorbachev. They are trying to resist this change, and they're using every trick in the book to disguise what is going on in Kosovo today. They call the Albanians fundamentalists. Now, we know that the Albanian population in Kosovo, in majority, are Muslims, but they're not fundamentalists. If they were, what would 1,500,000 Christian Slovenes be doing supporting them? And that is the case. So that's a lie. They call them terrorists. These are the Serbian authorities and the Serbian propaganda machine. That can't be the case either, because since the changes in 1989, even by their own account, 73 Albanians have been killed, no Serbs. How could they be terrorists if no Serbs have been killed, but at least 73 Albanians? So the last issue they have with their massive propaganda machine is that the Albanians are separatists, and if you give them autonomous status or give them a republic, they will now go to Albania. Well, logic does not justify that either, because obviously they're not going to go to another regime that is also at this point a communist regime. So I'm here to say that the situation in Kosovo is nothing more, nothing less than people looking for their self-determination, their right of self-governance, and treatment as an equal unit. And on July 2nd, 1990, the Kosovo Assembly, they were locked out of their own chamber. They had to do this in the lobby. 114 of 118 members voted, declared themselves as an autonomous unit within, I said, within the Federation and Confederation of Yugoslavia. No hint, no suggestion, no thought that they would ever become anything else but equal citizens of the Federation and Confederation of Yugoslavia. And the reaction to that was nothing short of brutal. As of this point, the Serbs have come in with armed forces, the Serbian Special Police, automatic weapons, riot gear, and they are intimidating all of the alternative leaders every day, calling them down for questioning. And before they leave, the last question that they're asked, or the last comment that's made by the secret police or the Serbian Special Police, is that if there are any demonstrations, there have only been peaceful demonstrations there, these people will be held accountable. In other words, they will be jailed under their so-called Article 133, which is a very archaic, communistic form of legislation, which says that you can be arrested for hostile activities and hostile propaganda for almost doing anything. So right now you have a situation where they have prevented the distribution of the Albanian-speaking paper called Relindia. So we know now that there is a total deprivation of freedom of the press. There is a total deprivation, this is as of last week, of freedom of the assembly. You cannot meet. I went to Kosovo 3 or 4 weeks ago before I went to Albania. And over 10,000 people greeted Congressman Lantos and I on the streets. But you know what? When we went upstairs to do a press conference, the Serbian secret police brutally chased these people, beating them up without any provocation to just disperse them. That is what's going on today. And that's why I compare what's going on in Kosovo as another form of apartheid. It's alive and well in Kosovo, even though it's being dismantled in South Africa. The other point I have to make, because we hear all the time about how the United States may back up credits from the IMF or the World Bank, that the European Parliament may consider aid to Yugoslavia because they want to see this country stay together, as I do. It's a country, read the press release we put out, that may dissolve. I hope it doesn't, It's not in the interests of a stable Balkan region, a stable Europe, to see Yugoslavia fall apart. But if it does, it's not because of Kosovo, it's going to be because the Serbs are not looking at what's happening in other large republics within the country, such as Slovenia and Croatia, and even now movements in Bosnia-Herzegovina and some of the others for pluralism. That is what's creating additional tensions. But we in the United States, and I'm sure all the leaders in Western Europe and around the world, want to see Yugoslavia remain together. We want to see its territorial integrity respected. That is a problem. In trying to get that, there are people who say we should give aid to Yugoslavia. Why? It's an economic basket case. It had inflation that amounted to almost 2,000% just before the turn of the year, when Ante Markovic, the prime minister, did come up with reforms that are working. And people would like to encourage those reforms. The problem we have, though, is that Yugoslavia may be a very bad investment. As one international syndicated columnist put it, if we give Yugoslavia the credits they want through the IMF, backed up with U.S. money, and we know how big our own deficit is right now, how do we know our people are going to get that money back? And in that editorial, he said, Yugoslavia may not last 15 months, let alone the 15 years necessary to amortize those loans. So I tell people, and I just came back from the economic summit in Houston, didn't speak to the leaders, but I spoke to the press there, that this may be a very bad investment at a time when monies are desperately needed in other countries that are trying real reforms, like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and the others. The other reason why it's a bad investment is that no country should expect aid from democratic countries such as the United States, the ones in Western Europe, and Australia, until it can show us that they treat all their citizens with respect. The reason why Australia is a successful country, as is the United States of America, maybe the grandest social experiment of all, only 214 years old, and we just celebrated our Declaration of Independence when we waved bye-bye to, I guess it was King George, because of the repressions that existed in those times. The reason why we work as pluralistic democracies, Australia and the United States, is that we respect all of our citizens. We give all of our citizens the opportunity to fulfill their potential as human beings. That is not what is going on today in Yugoslavia. The Albanians their human rights are violated every day, and don't listen to Joe DioGuardi. Pick up the report just last week by Amnesty International. Pick up the reports by the Helsinki Watch. Pick up the reports and the monitors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations. Pick up the resolution that was passed by the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House last year, and again it was reintroduced this year in even stronger terms by Senator Dole, the Republican minority leader, and the Democrat who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Claiborne Pell, and in the House, Congressman Lantos, and John Porter, the co-chairman, Democrat-Republican, both sides of the aisle of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus. This is not the Albanian population speaking in Australia or America, or just Joe DioGuardi. This is the world speaking. They are witnessing one of the most egregious applications of the deprivation of human rights anywhere. And I think we have every right to refer to it as an apartheid. We just saw Nelson Mandela released. But what the world doesn't know, because for some reason, when it comes to Kosovo, you don't find it in the press. Maybe it's a confusing issue, I grant you that. Everybody wants to talk about Albania, but let me tell you, the situation in Kosovo is one of the worst applications of what one majority group is doing to an ethnic minority group. And it has to be highlighted more and more. But what they don't know, the press, is that there was a gentleman that was in jail longer than Nelson Mandela. He is the Nelson Mandela of Kosovo. His name is Adem Damaci. Only because of great pressure and only because of what was happening in South Africa was he finally released after 27 years. Longer than Nelson Mandela, but nobody writes about him. Okay? So I am very happy that the press in Australia is here. I'm very happy to be greeted by so many good people, the members of the Albanian Australian community here and others. And I hope that this issue finally takes its place where it belongs as one of the most heinous examples of man's inhumanity to man. And I'll end by saying what one great American said, I believe it was Martin Luther King. He said that if there is injustice anywhere, then justice is threatened everywhere. so that the world is not a safe place until all despots, all dictatorships, and all egregious situations involving human rights, man's humanity against man, are eliminated. And that's the reason I'm here today. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions you may have.
In what tangible ways are human rights?
Paper in Albanian to that 2 million population of Albanians called Relindia. There is no right of assembly. I was going to mention this, but since you've raised it, I'm now going to show you, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. When I was there in Kosovo, an Albanian mother came to me and gave me these pictures. I've had them blown up, and I brought these several weeks ago to Copenhagen, because what I did is I went to meet some of the delegations, including our own ambassador, Max Kampelman, to be sure that the issue of Kosovo was raised. Now, this young man, 22, was in the Yugoslav army. He was in Zagreb, Croatia, and if you read the reports from the Serbian doctors, here they are. Mother gave them to me. I had them translated. They're in Serbian. He supposedly, while he was on the rifle range, turned the automatic weapon on himself. Now, I'll show you these pictures. You'll see at least 3 bullet wounds in the heart, but you'll see bullet wounds in the back. He's got them behind the ear. You can see the awful beating this gentleman got. Now, let me say something else. When a body comes back in a coffin, and Albanian soldiers in the army, it is considered treason if you open the coffin. They say you cannot open the coffin, it must be buried. 40 young boys were buried like this, and I believe this is the first time the family opened the coffin, took the pictures, put them back, and put the coffin in the ground. Now there are 40 mothers joining with the Democratic Alliance looking to exhume the remains of their sons to see under what conditions were they killed. Many stories have come back where these young boys, Albanians, are proud to be Albanian, and they refuse to renounce that. And in the chauvinism that goes on even in the army, they are brutalized. And sometimes they're killed. And I think if you look at these pictures, you will see the beating this young man got and the bullet wounds in the back. You'll see the bullet wound in the heart. You might say, why is he sewed up this way very crudely? Well, guess what? I heard. They remove all the organs without the parents' permission, and they use them to experiment on for the young Serbian doctors going through medical school and whatnot. And in some cases, they tell me that the body is just put in pieces. In this case, they crudely sewed it back up. You ask what kinds of human rights violations are going on. I would tell you that this is still in the coffin here, you can see, and then the body was taken out and turned around. Now, I hope that we can exhume the other 40 coffins, because I think these mothers are entitled to know what happened to their sons as they were fighting as members of the army of Yugoslavia, not as members of the army of Kosovo, because there are many Albanians who served in that army. So you have this kind of a situation. You have the situation where the strikes after 1989 caused the leader of Kosovo, Azem Vlasi, to be arrested. He was only recently released under great pressure. In fact, he was put on trial, again, under the so-called Article 133 for hostile activities and propaganda. Again, all of his human rights were deprived. He was detained for months and months and months in jail. And he didn't even have the right kind of legal representation, and people had to arrange for that to be had as well. I can go through a whole list of things, but you have a group in Kosovo called the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, headed by a Dr. Zekaria Sana. We had a congressional hearing where we invited the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, made up of 200 Republican and Democratic members, invited the people from Kosovo, all the leaders, to testify. But we wanted especially Dr. Sana. Ibrahim Rugova did come, the head of the Democratic Alliance. Well, Dr. Sana is so effective and so outspoken, they denied him his passport. In spite of an official invitation by the U.S. Congress, till today, he has not given his passport to leave Yugoslavia. The same, I might say, with Adem Domaci, who was released after 27 years. We're trying to get him here. He cannot get a passport. So I can go through a whole litany of violations. But let me tell you that you'd have to look hard and long for any other country where a minority group is as victimized as the Albanian population is in Kosovo today.
If there are reforms in Albania, do you see maybe an exodus to Albania from Kosovo?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, they're very close. So this region was all part of the same country at one point. I would say that it's hard to speculate what's going to go on. The issue in Albania is totally separate from the issue in Kosovo today. In Albania, You're talking about a country that's going through its own internal problems, as did Romania. But at least we see some good signs. I was there. On the trip a few weeks ago, I went with Congressman Lantos to meet with President Ramiz Alia, and as I said before in the last interview, you may not have heard it, that we were the first ones in 51 years allowed to drive across that border near Prizren. I'm hopeful, very hopeful, that the situation will evolve in Albania, because that is the intention, declared intention of Mr. Ramiz Alia, that you will have a reformation so that there is an opportunity for the people to choose their own form of government. What you're seeing now is that the people are impatient, and I guess they should be impatient. They're witnessing what they see around them, and they're saying, we'd like to see it sooner. And I think Mr. Alia is responding to those changes, I hope as fast as he can, but I see some responses that we did not see with Romania, so there's hope there. In Kosovo, you have a different situation. You have a situation where a majority group, other than Albanian, is subjugating a large minority. Now, I don't know whether or not there would be an exodus from Kosovo. I tell you why there wouldn't be, to my mind. I've been to Kosovo 3 times in the last 6 months. The people in Kosovo love their land. They are attached to their land, like they're attached to the language. The world doesn't know about Albanians. The people in Kosovo today in Albania are the remnants of the great Illyrian Empire. Their language is 6,000 years old. It preceded the Etruscans, the Latins, the Greeks, and the Romans. In fact, there are words in those languages taken from the Albanian. But since the Albanians didn't write their history as well as the Greeks, and much of the Albanian history, in fact, is written in Greek, because their alphabet was only perfected in the 15th century, when we see the first writings, much of Albanian history is confused. And we hope at some point that the world takes note of that, and it's changed. But these people are different than the Serbs. The Serbs have a Cyrillic alphabet. They have a Latin alphabet. The Serbs are mainly Christians. These people are mainly Muslims in that area, but religion is not an issue. The Serbs, at least the Serbian authorities, want communism. They want democracy. The languages are totally different. One is a Slavic group. This was the creation of the South Slavic state in 1918 because of the machinations of the Russian Empire. They created a state for their South Slavic cousins called Yugoslavia. Yugo meaning South Slavia, okay? And somehow they took half of Albania at that point and put it there, because Kosovo was part of the country of Albania from 1912 to 1918. This is what has created those problems. So people have to understand the history of this region to understand that these people don't want to leave Kosovo because they feel it's their land. It's not like they emigrated from Albania to Yugoslavia. They were there. Why should they go back across the way? And I believe if you ask that question, and maybe you have to ask that question to Albanians who come from Kosovo, no matter what happens to Albania, I don't know one that I've heard that would leave their beloved Kosovo to go into Albania, although I'm sure they're wishing their cousins in Albania and Tirana well. Any other questions?
Referring to about the right of assembly, is that?
Yes. When I was in Houston, which was actually Monday, so we're actually talking this week. You know, you lose time when you come 36 hours from New York. There's quite a difference. I was called by people in Kosovo, and I can't tell you their names because they would be victimized if they knew that they were giving me information. But I have direct contact with in the folder, because this is basically the gist of what we said in Houston. And I was told that that morning, for the second time in a row, the Albanian paper, Lindia, was prevented from being distributed on the basis of, quote, untrue and alarming news. And the reason that the Serbs gave for this is, one, there was an editorial on what they said was the unlawful, what the Albanians said was the unlawful dissolution of the Kosovo Assembly by the Serbian government.
So the newspaper hasn't been closed down, it's been prevented from being distributed
At this point,
twice.
yes. It's, well, twice to that point. Now I understand it has not been allowed to be distributed since. So in effect, the Serbs have, they started with taking over the utility industry, the electrical power stations. Then they went for the newspaper. Now I understand they're replacing all of the Albanian judges with Serbian judges. They've already, in effect, assumed the the economy, the Albanian economy, and the numbers that I was given that morning is that just in the last few months, 10,000 Albanians by the United Nations, the issue of recolonization. So just recently, 10,000 Albanians have been replaced, and at this point, 60,000 Albanian families live below the poverty line, and members of the family are forced to go out and work in Germany, Sweden. That's why there are so many expatriates. If you go around Europe and you find large Albanian American communities, because with the large families, they make enough, several members, to send back just so these people can eat because they have no job. It's obvious that the Serbian authorities are trying to squeeze out the Albanian population on the guise that Kosovo to them is Serbian, not Albanian. And I think if you look at the past history, the Albanians have always been there. It was the Serbs who came in the 7th and 8th century, and it was not the cradle, as they say, of the Serbian population. But in effect, that's what just happened last week. Just took some notes from that telephone conversation from Kosovo. They've reimposed a state of emergency. But I can tell you this, a state of emergency has existed in one form or another since March of 1989, when the Albanians peacefully demonstrated against the forceful taking of their autonomy, when members of their own assembly were intimidated, literally at the point of a gun, because they had tanks going back and forth outside the Kosovo Assembly to force the changes in the Constitution, which took away the autonomy that President Tito had given to the province of Kosovo. Same thing, I might add, with the Hungarian province of Vojvodina in the northern part of the Serbian Republic.
And now the assembly doesn't meet, is that what you're saying, since last week?
Yes, it's now illegal for the Kosovo Assembly to meet. In effect, there is no longer a local form of government, and all government functions, all economic functions, all press functions have now been taken over by the Serbian authorities. So you have 2 million Albanians who are now totally disenfranchised as an ethnic group. And again, just look at what Amnesty International has just put out in the last few days. I don't have that report with me. It was just told to me before I came here. I didn't have a chance to get it. But you may want to get a copy of that report, Max and Caesar, and distribute it to the press here. And other reports from Helsinki Watch and the United Nations Special Rapporteur, because I went there in March. Let me give you a situation. I was asked to go to eulogize an Albanian civil rights activist, Enver Hadre, who was shot on the streets of Brussels, assassinated. The press at that time, the Brussels press, Belgian press, said he was assassinated by the Serbian secret police. Well, just in the last couple of weeks now, if you read the press in Belgrade, this is proven to be true, because someone who was a party to that has now confessed. In fact, in confessing, I guess it was somewhere after a few drinks, that person was shot by the secret police, but his wife now is giving us the whole story, that in fact it was the Serbian secret police, UDBA, who ordered this civil rights activist, Enver Hadre, to be shot. He had the most to do with getting a resolution last year from the European Parliament on the situation in Kosovo. Okay? I might add that I have to take precautions myself as I go around, because you just don't know what the situation is. It's obviously a situation where there's more heat than light. And I compare the situation in Kosovo today to the United States 30 years ago in Selma, Alabama, because you can't justify the actions of the Serbian authorities against this Albanian population by any other word but racial and apartheid, because logic would not allow for you to understand the actions and the reactions of the Serbian people. It has to be as bad as it was back in Selma, Alabama, when Martin Luther King was marching for the human rights and civil rights of the blacks in the United States, and as you know, there's been much progress since. Hopefully we're presented by Albanians. 114 of the 118 Albanians voted. So there was clearly the majority that they needed to pass that legislation. Until today, the Albanian people feel that they acted constitutionally within the Constitution of Yugoslavia, that they were permitted to have that assembly and vote, the political chamber, to declare themselves an autonomous unit within the Federation and Confederation of Yugoslavia.
Recently, Dr. Franjo Tuđman, the president of the newly elected democratic government of Croatia, met with Mr. Rugova, I believe, one of the Albanian dissidents from Kosovo. Have you yourself got any ties, have you any ties with the newly elected democratic governments of Croatia and even with Slovenia?
I went to Slovenia earlier this year, and I met with the head of the Liberal Democratic Party, Joseph Skolch, and I met with also the head of the alternative movement from Kosovo in Slovenia, Sali Kabashi. I was greeted at the convention at that point of the Liberal Democratic Party because their elections were about to happen. And as we know, those elections resulted in a democratic form of government, and Slovenia today is so disgusted with the intransigence of the Serbian authorities and what's going on in Yugoslavia that they are threatening to secede. Let's hope that doesn't happen. So I have some connections there. We also talk to people in Croatia. Some Albanians have run in the Croatian elections. One, to be sure, is Tom Berisha, who served as a general in the Yugoslav army. He's an ethnic Albanian who ran in those elections, who came to the United States to testify, by the way, before Congress. And we're very hopeful about what's going on in Croatia today. As a matter of fact, I would direct your attention to an editorial, an op-ed piece in the New York Times by Mr. Tuđman. It was an excellent piece on why Croatia is opting for democracy and why the whole security or the whole stability of Yugoslavia is now being threatened by the intransigence of the communist Serbian government in Belgrade. So I would tell you that yes, I do have ties, and yes, there is a connection with what is going on in Kosovo with those two, but it's only an indirect connection because the people who want democracy in Slovenia and the people who want democracy in Kosovo are obviously promoting democracy. I said Croatia are obviously promoting democracy in Kosovo and support 100%. If you talk to the Slovene leaders and the Croatian leaders, you'll see that they support the Albanians 100%. Very large ethnic Albanian population in Australia. I was told that in the Melbourne area alone, there are tens of thousands. I don't know exactly how much, but maybe, how much is that? 10,000? 15,000 in Melbourne. But I'm also told that there are maybe 50,000 all over Australia. When you look at the population in Canberra, Adelaide, Sydney, and others, and we have here Mr. Mazna Krasniqi, who's from New Zealand. So you also have an ethnic Albanian population in New Zealand. Let me say this about the Albanians. The Albanians today are much like the Jews. They are a dispersed nation. What the Egyptians and the Romans did to the Jews several thousand years ago, the Turks did to the Albanians 500 years ago. And as a result of that, today you have 3.2 million Albanians in Albania, 3.5 million Albanians in Yugoslavia, of which 2 million are in Kosovo. You have 2 million in Turkey, 1 million in Greece, 1 million in Italy, in the United States about 1 million, 500,000 of whom are in the New York metropolitan area. So you have approximately 14 million Albanians around the world, a nation, in effect, that wants to see human rights, civil rights, self-determination, self-governance for their people in Albania and in Kosovo. And they don't connect the two. There is no suggestion anywhere that there should be a merger of the two, except the Serbs always use that as an excuse to demean the position of the ethnic Albanians who are looking merely for democracy.
So you're here to raise awareness, and you're here at the invitation of the Albanian people in Australia.
Exactly. And I'll be meeting with members of your parliament. There is a big dinner being hosted tonight where I am told that members of the parliament will be there. In fact, I'm told that there already have been resolutions in prior years on this issue. Is that right? That's correct. So the
hostile acts by the Serbian government against Albanians.
I guess the bottom line is that apartheid is alive and well in Yugoslavia. We see it being dismantled in South Africa. Nelson Mandela has been released, but we have a situation right now in Kosovo where the majority population, 93% of the 2 million people in Kosovo, are Albanians, but the 7% are now in charge of the court system, the economy, the police system, the press, and everything else. And I can't think of a better way to describe the situation there today as another form of apartheid.
So what sort of physical acts of violence have been perpetrated on Albanians?
Well, since 1989, when the Serbian authorities forced the Kosovo Assembly to change the constitution, in effect removing the autonomy of the province, as was the case under President Tito, there have been many demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, that have resulted in deaths of Albanians. But even by the Serbian count, 73 people, Albanians, have died since March 28, 1989. But there are many, many other brutalities being committed. Many people are detained, many people are beaten, many people are intimidated. As of just a few days ago, the Press Valindia, which is the Albanian-speaking newspaper, has been taken over by the Serbs. They have not allowed it to be distributed now for over a week. Radio and television Pristina is also now in control of the Serbs. So what you have is a large population, a minority population within the province of Serbia, or the Republic of Serbia, that has been denied freedom of assembly, freedom of press, basically freedom of speech, and are being victimized in many ways every day.
Okay, so what will you be suggesting as a way to prevent this infringement of human rights?
I guess the best thing to suggest is dialogue, because where there's talk, there's hope. But
Has there been no dialogue?
There's been no dialogue. In fact, when the Congressional Committee went to visit Kosovo last summer, this is Congressman Steny Hoyer, and even more recently another group went, they had a meeting with both sides. And Congressman Hoyer remarked then in the press and told me when I met him in Denmark at the Copenhagen-Helsinki meetings that he was depressed and shocked when he asked the Serbian puppet leader, Raman Morina, who at this table would you like to speak to? Because I see here Albanians who would like to talk. Dr. Ibrahim Rugova was one, Dr. Zakari Itsana. These are the heads of the human rights and alternative movements. And he could not find anyone to speak with. In effect, that is the position taken by the Serbian government, that there is no room for dialogue. And that to me is totally wrong. The Albanians are peaceful. All they want is their right of self-determination, and I think they deserve to talk to the Serbian authorities to resolve these differences.
Okay, so could you also tell me, just to go off on a tangent a bit, the gentleman who has allegedly been in jail longer than Nelson Mandela, what proof is there of that?
Well, I guess we'd have to go back into the files. His story has been covered in Europe many times. It's not a story that's covered here, I guess, or in the United States. But Adem Demaci was arrested, I guess, for the first time in the early 50s. He was arrested on 3 different occasions, and he refused to recant, even though he was released on 2 occasions.